What's up guys, my name is Lex Veldhuis and welcome back to another episode of Poker Coaching. Today we have two very interesting hands. One hand is going to be from a really tough $1,000 high roller and the other is going to be another final table hand. In this video we'll learn really useful information about how to play from the big blind and how boards interact with our range and our betting strategies. Enjoy! Oh my god, I hope Mbappe misses. We have lots of misses that we can also lead. I think I go bigger if it's not a queen. There's definitely a chance I have Jack 10, right? God damn it. Keep timing out the same two tournaments. Alright, too bad, but you know, nice little turn.
Alright, let's get right into it. So the cutoff opens, button calls, and we overcall the queen 8 offsuit. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I think pretty standard. Both, I mean, the open and the call are in really late positions, so that means that my calling range stays intact. I don't really have to make any sort of like crazy adjustments to go tighter. So yeah, just calling along.
Yeah, I mean, I would fold some hands, but not this one. This one's too good.
Yeah.
So, we get to the flop, we check, which I think is very clearly the range play. You shouldn't have any leads here. In position bets. So this is the opener, and they bet a third. And I think we only have one answer here, which is calling, right? So I don't think this is super debatable yet. So okay, so what are you thinking now?
Okay, so I think I have a massive I think the eights massively in my favor. I have a lot more offsuit eights. I have a lot more suited eights. So just massively in my favor. I also think that they're checking the 8x component of their range quite a bit on the flop versus 2 on this particular board with the big blind in as well. Yeah, I just think it's massively in my favor now. And therefore I want to lead. So, you know, I don't know if everything's there is correct, and I guess I can just keep talking. But
what about bet size?
Yeah, okay, so that's where I was going. So this is where I kind of run into a problem, because I sometimes feel when this card hits, I get too much thinking about, oh my god, we're so deep, I want to get value. And I start betting too big, or that I think like, oh, if I bet small, I'm not going to have value, kind of, you know, disregarding that I can overbet rivers, etc. But I have been going as a standard towards like 70% bet sizings. It's weird because like I feel like I'm getting a lot of turn call or something, but river play just isn't working out. Or, you know, sometimes I'm clearing too much of their range and then I'm on the river and I'm like, oh shit, I have Jack 10. I block all of their sort of like turn calls. What do I do now? So one of my first questions is like, is this just even deep? Is this just too big? Should I always just go towards like some sort of like 1/3? Does it matter if it's like, you know, ace 5 deuce 5 or, you know, 9-8 3-8? Is, you know, just some questions around that.
Sure. So I think that as long as your impression is that the card belongs to you and not them, for the most part, from a board coverage perspective. So like my language would be, as long as you believe this card is asymmetric, it belongs to you and not your opponent, you can lead to larger sizes. So in this case, the cutoff is the player that opened. They're opening offsuit 9s, which means they're not opening offsuit 8s. What that means is that they are in a bad way when the 8 pairs. And they can have suited 8s, so 10-8 suited, Jack 8 suited, etc. But as you pointed out, they're not as likely to c-bet those on the flop. They're probably very significantly underweight this card, trips. As a result, if you bet big on the turn and bet big on the river, and they just defend their range at mathematically reasonable frequencies to constrain you from bluffing too often, their range will not consist of a bunch of 8s because they just don't have them. So if they do that, if they defend their range properly, their range will still just be a bunch of 9s, 3s, and pocket pairs like 10s and jacks. It will not be trips. And so that's the litmus test, is like, if I bet really big twice, what happens? And if your opponent doesn't have an 8, he's not a magician, right? He can't just make an 8 appear out of nowhere. So you can't just start defending a bunch of 8s because they don't exist. So in this case, that's true. It would be different if the board was like 10-9-9, 10-9-3, and the turn was a 9.
Mm.
then I would be advocating probably for smaller bet sizes a little bit more
Ah.
often, because your opponent actually has the trips coverage quite significantly at that point. And yes, it's a different world. So
So so
here, go
so
ahead.
it's like the more asymmetric the good hands become, the bigger I bet,
Correct.
and the more, because like even in the other example, like 10-9-3 and then the turn in 9,
Hmm.
they would have a lot more trips, but it would still be a card that's in my favor, right? Like the equity
Hmm.
shifts towards me.
Yep.
So, but it's not enough for me to go big. So, oh wow, okay, that's such an insanely
Yeah,
useful
because
thing.
sure. So when you think about like using some really large multiple of pot bet on the river, so like overbetting, right? If you think about overbetting for for like 3x pot, 4x pot, 5x pot, how is that done? It's done when you have the nuts and they don't.
Hmm.
That's when you do it. You can jam for 10x pot. Doesn't matter. You can jam for 100x pot. You can jam for as many multiples of pot as you want, as long as you can have the nuts and they can't. If that's not true, then the whole thing breaks down. You can't bet that big anymore. That's like so the more true that is, the bigger you can go comfortably. And so in this case, like the fact that your opponent, it's really difficult to come up with credible ways for this player to have trips. So you can start using larger bets. It's fine. And yeah, that's
So,
the way
is
that
my
works.
bet too small then? Like, should I go like full geometrical and bet 7K here and just shove the river?
No, I wouldn't have done that. I actually really like this size. But you could probably go with pot, and that would probably be a good idea.
Hmm.
So yeah, it would be defensible to go bigger. This allows you to keep the 9x component in the range still, which I think is probably helpful for some of your 9x combos, just because they get a lot of protection still.
Ah,
If you polarize, then you have an 8 or bust, which is not stupid, but it's just you want to keep in mind that now you can't do that with a 9, which
yeah.
probably has consequences, right? Like if you did that with all of your 8s, then all of your 9s would be left by themselves. And if
Mm.
all of your 9s are by themselves, they're going to get picked apart by pocket 10s plus. This is probably a good middle ground where you can still include some of the 9x combos in this bet size.
Okay, because if I bet pot and I do it with the eights all the time, whenever I bet small, they just raise me.
Correct. That's what should end up happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So you bet and you get called, and the river's a queen. So what do you think?
It's kind of funny because I make a boat, but I still lose to nines. Like the only advantage here is that I beat 9-8 suited and threes. But in a way, I feel like Jack 10 is kind of a reasonably big part of how I can bluff. So in that sense, I don't know if the queen is such a great card for me because I just increase the amount of value bets that I have.
Mhm.
So before the river, let's say the river's a 4, I was planning on betting like 15K.
Right.
And now I'm just like, okay, now I have more value bets. So I feel like also like even if it's not a value bet for me, it's still a hand that they can have as well. So I feel like I have to scale down my bets because of those reasons.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so I decided to bet pot.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, you just want to choose a sizing that's comfortable with your 8s. So you don't want to like isolate. I'm glad you didn't, if to the extent that you chose pot or something. Yeah, so this is good. So I'm glad that you chose a sizing that was not a jam. Personally, I wouldn't like to have seen you jam this card. I don't think, but that it really just comes down to how big you think you should go when you have trips. 2x pot is still probably somewhat reasonable with trips, but as you pointed out, your opponent can now have Jack 10, which is very relevant
Or queens.
because if you jam, and queens, for sure. And your opponent could probably also be conceived to have like ace 8 of clubs or something. Obviously not when you have the 8 of clubs in your hand, but just as a hand in their range. So they have hands that beat your trips combos at like a reasonable clip, particularly on the queen river. So jamming for 2x pot is not as attractive because it's not really the nuts. Whereas if the river was like the 4 of diamonds, maybe you could just jam with trips.
Yeah.
Right, your opponent doesn't have trips. It's hard for him to beat trips. So you just slip it. You just ship it. So it's okay. But on this card, I don't think that's going to work anymore. And I think that this hand should just go wherever you want to put trips. And I think it's very defensible for you to want to put trips in like this bet size. I think it's reasonable for you to want to put trips in like a small overbet, like 14,000 or something. But I still wouldn't jam. So it's kind of weird to bet 14,000, but I still think it works. Yeah, this should just go wherever trips goes, in my opinion. Or you could check it, which is like kind of weird, but I think that if you can include 9x here, 9x probably checks this river. And then which like if you're going to include any traps, which you should include some, if you're going to include any traps in the checking range, which traps you want to include? Probably boats. Which boats? Probably boats that block calls. Which boats block calls? I mean, like maybe this one doesn't block calls quite as well. Maybe it's more like Queen of Spades 8. because your opponent could have like queen jack of spades and hit this river, or king queen of spades and hit this river, or ace queen of spades and hit this river, or queen 10 of spades and hit this river. So maybe queen of spades 8 is a good way to check.
Yeah.
And this is like a pretty good way to just do this.
So I'm pretty happy then about this hand and thinking.
Nice.
Because
me too.
you know, yeah, it seems like I was sort of not spot on is a big word, but a lot of my instinctual thinking about like the way this board progresses seemed right. So that's good.
Right.
Can you show just that they fold?
Yeah,
Nice.
you did get the.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure. You know, sometimes you're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, then that happened, and it's like, oh fuck, no, never mind. They called and they had fucking set of threes or something.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
awesome, thank you.
All right.
All right, I'm so happy with Jordan's thoughts on that hand. I think I played the hand really well. I also think my reasoning is really sound, and I'm happy with pretty much every decision on every street. It's still really good to get that confirmation. One of the most valuable things that Jordan said there, of course, is that the more nuts we have compared to our opponent on a certain board, the bigger we can bet. And that's such an insanely useful guideline to use on boards that favor the big blind. So, very happy with that one. Let's jump into the next one. This is also a pot from the big blind, but it's a final table and a board I'm really not happy about. Let's see how we navigate through this hand and then hear Jordan's thoughts about it. These are fun. Winner take all. Do I bet call? What a weird spot. I think that he jams diamonds on the turn, so that's why I'm not entirely sure how to proceed. I'm gonna call a shove, by the way.
Okay.
All right, so this is a four-handed final table of a bounty, which is, I think, always important, right? Because you have that top two that gets a big pay bump over being third, and also the fact that getting a stack is a huge advantage because you can knock people out.
Okay. All right, so we get to the flop with 8-6 off. And okay, so you said this was four-handed, you said?
Yeah, four-handed.
Is this like, so this is four-handed at the end of the tournament?
Yeah. This is like final table four-handed.
Okay, perfect. All right. What are you thinking about pre-flop then? Do you give any thoughts to folding this hand pre-flop? Do you think this hand's a snap?
I mean, it's definitely at the bottom. Like, I think what's significant also is that it's like a pure min raise. I think once it goes like 2.2, I'm already getting definitely a lot tighter. But I still this is at the bottom, I would say. Like, yeah, I don't think like maybe 5-7 off. I don't know, but it's definitely getting a little bit more murky then. So it's something I'm conscious of, but I still think this hand is in there.
Yeah, this is it's close. It would be a fold against the cutoff for sure. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's like I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking about. It's just really, really, really close. We check the flop, and your opponent checks back. What would you have done if your opponent had bet?
Fold.
Okay, yeah, me too. Yeah. Okay, so we get to the turn, and now what are you thinking about?
I mean, I definitely don't think there's going to be a whole lot of checking from his end with the nuts part of his range. I mean, yeah. I mean, even with like a set of queens, right? Jack 9 especially, because you unblock every call on the board. But like, let's say the nuts that blocks the most hands, like even if you set of queens, still so many reasons to bet small here, or to bet at least in whatever way you want. So I feel like when he checks back, that he's pretty capped.
Okay, so there's a few things. The first one is I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with this pre-flop call. I think we should. I think we should have just folded. I think we should have just folded pre-flop.
Okay.
So yeah, I would have just passed. So I'd fold pre. It's just too much. I think when you're not in last, I think like being in second here, like he can just leverage these two stacks, and that's going to end up causing you too many problems. But like I was still wrestling with that problem as you were talking. So yeah, I think I would just fold pre-flop pure. I wouldn't have called. If your opponent had bet the flop, we would have check folded, but he didn't. So now we're on the turn. And yeah, so when we get here, they're somewhat capped when they check back aboard this dynamic, which is you're pointing out, right? Like on Queen 10-8, if they have a set, they're going to bet this flop. I mean, this is a very dynamic board. They can get outrun. So they're going to bet the strongest hands. They're going to bet Queen 10, I think, on the flop. But they're probably going to have hands like 9-7 still. I think those types of hands are probably still reasonable to check the flop back with. Basically, like draws that they can have that they don't want to be check raised with. Like 9-7's not a great hand to get check raised with. So I think that in a polarized betting range, I think this player might be more incentivized to bet like King 5 offsuit, King of Clubs 5 of hearts, or King of Clubs 5 of diamonds would be a better bet. And then check hands like 9-7. So I think this hand's probably a mix. I don't think betting it's stupid, but I think checking is actually like probably underrated, and probably also quite good. But yeah, I think betting's fine.
What do you think of my size?
It's fine. I mean, it's a little bit on the big side. It's probably too big, considering you're in second. So yeah,
So
I
you're
see him
saying
adjust
that
it.
it's like blowing the pot up to where we leave ourselves in a possible all-in scenario on the river just isn't what we want to do here in general, or?
Yeah, well, like when the board blanks, you kind of do want that, but you don't know it's going to blank yet. So yeah, I don't think you want to bet this big in a situation like this where there's so much like volatility still in the equity, and you can also lose right now. Like I think this player could have, Queen 6, 10-6 suited. This player could have sixes, although it's unlikely, obviously. And then this player just has like a bunch of hands that you're not actually getting value from. Like it kind of looks like you're getting value from them, but you're really not. So in hands in that category, I would put like 8-9 of diamonds, Jack 8 of diamonds, 10-9 of diamonds, 10-7 of diamonds, Jack 10 of diamonds. Those are like those hands have so many outs that when you adjust for the fact that you're going to bust sometimes and how important your chips are to you, like I don't know if you're making very much money against those types of hands. So I probably would have bet smaller and like not been super thrilled about it, or checked. I think checking, like I said, is still a reasonable answer.
Yeah. Okay, best card in the deck.
Yeah, this is Jin. No. What are you thinking now?
Okay, so there's like I have, especially when the ace is out on the board, I do think that, I mean, I can say like all big blind range, so I have a lot of diamonds, especially on ace high board. I'll have a lot more flushes, but at the same time, like he's a chip leader. Are you telling me that he's not opening fucking Jack 3 of diamonds, right? Of course he is. So I don't know how much of an advantage I have. I was just struggling here because my bet size on the turn, I felt that would introduce a lot of shoves from his side with backdoor flush draws as well, right? That if he has a hand like, I don't know, like a hand he didn't really want to bet fold on the flop, maybe some king 9 or something like that, or maybe just like a complete airball. And he had diamonds that he'd want to, like 8-9 of diamonds is, I think, a really good example. 8-9 of diamonds, 8-7 of diamonds, that he's just going to jam the turn a lot as well. So I was up in the air. I was just kind of floating between two ideas that all of his like nuts hands he would either c-bet or jammed on the river, because like all of the hands that are really strong around the ace, I think he would have bet. All of the hands that I think are strong around the diamonds, I think there's a big chance he shoves the turn. But at the same time, I mean, it's a card that obviously has like a pretty big equity advantage for him concerning the ace. So that's why I went back to more of a block size. Possibly would have bet called here just because of the way I think he plays diamonds a lot on the turn, and that he could potentially turn 8-7, 10-9, that sort of thing into a bluff on the river here.
Okay.
Lots of things.
Okay, so you said a lot of things. There's a lot to unpack. Okay, so here, I think that your opponent will be calling here with a lot of diamonds. The reason that your opponent would jam would be because they think that you have value bet folds. So if your opponent has like 8-9 of diamonds, then it would be a reason for them to jam if they think that you have like a substantial amount of value bet folds. The issue with that is that this sizing doesn't really indicate that that's going to be the case. This sizing is more polarizing, right? So I don't expect hands like 8-9 of diamonds or whatever to be converted to bluffs very readily. I expect them to just call and draw. Again, this shoving would mostly make sense if they think you have a substantial amount of value bet folds. And in this distribution, you're in second place. He checks back the flop, sure, but I just don't think that when you bet this big, that's the interpretation that you're going to be bet folding like Queen X or something. Because you're not value betting a pair of tens, right? Like if you bet this large, this is not 10x. Mm-hmm. This is something better than that. And considering this player check back the flop, I don't think the understanding is that like you're going to be bet folding hands better than 10x a bunch here.
Yeah.
So I don't agree that they're not going to have diamonds or that they're going to shove a lot of those types of hands on the turn. I do think they're probably just going to call. They've also checked back the flop, which means that they're like, kind of telling you that they're capped. So shoving is the opposite of being capped. Like it's, that would be really strong hands. So it's not very congruent with the fact that they check back the flop either. So I think that they're probably going to be playing a very call heavy strategy with a very low raise percentage across the board. So that's the first part. The second part is that I agree with a lot of the other stuff you said, which is that this card is very significant. It's a better card for this player probably than you, especially when you're thinking about this hand. But like they're going to have various ways of having aces up, like ace 6, ace 8, ace 10, or like combos that make at least some sense. They're going to have king jack potentially, which is annoying. They'll have various ways of having flushes. As you pointed out, they could open hands like all the way down to like jack 3 of diamonds or something. So they can certainly have flushes now. So you're going to run into the nuts a lot, and because you're going to run into the nuts a lot, betting small is a good idea, as long as you think your hand can still can still extract value. And I do think that's the case, particularly if we bet small. So I actually really like the answer. So I like the conclusion. I just disagreed with the way that you were assessing the range on the turn.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm happy because I was just like, I was just, like I said, I was floating between two theories, but I think that you point out really well that the turn bet size is kind of what makes matters a lot more simple, because it does introduce more flat calls by diamonds by them. And it's also like, if they cap themselves on the flop, they're going to be conscientious of the fact on the turn and not all of a sudden think like, I'm going to rep a hand and go all in, like players are too good for that. Okay, cool. Well, I'm happy with most of that, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, bud. So this hand was definitely a little bit more shaky, but one thing that I really like and that I think is a positive takeaway, that even though my thinking was floating between two different strategies, I still came up with an answer that was very sound and an answer that made a lot of sense. So in-game, I made a good decision, and now through some reflection and some studying, I also found the right way to think throughout the hand, so that's a good win. It's really good to also critically think about the hands that you win, and we see this time and time again in these coaching videos. I really hope you enjoyed this segment again. The links are in the description if you want to find out more about BBZ's School of Poker. He explains all these concepts at length. They have bundles, free videos, anything you want to check out is going to be there. Of course, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe so I know you guys are enthusiastic, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.